Hey guys, tonight we're diving straight into the venomous blade-swinging, sometimes eyebrow-raising tales of the most epic deaths in history. Imagine the torch-lit stone walls of ancient tombs, thundering hooves across muddy battlefields, and the eerie silence of emperors who simply never woke up. You're about to slip back into history's slipperiest final exits, and if you're squeamish, well, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fun seeing night owls from across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Alexandria. It's hot, sticky, and the city smells like salt and sandalwood. Torchlight flickers against cool marble pillars. You're following a trail of crushed rose petals and tension. The palace has been silent for hours. Too silent. In a quiet chamber tucked away from the Roman garrison, Cleopatra VII, yes, that Cleopatra is reclining on a cushioned couch draped in silks, so rich they seem to hum. Her fingers tremble slightly as she adjusts the golden bracelet on her wrist. It's not jewelry though, not really. That little basket at her feet, it doesn't hold fruit. It holds death. The story goes that she reaches inside and pulls out an asp, a venomous Egyptian cobra. Slender, hypnotic, deadly. It hisses softly as it coils around her wrist like a final lover preparing to whisper goodbye. You lean closer, watching the moment her skin meets fang. No flinching, no screaming, just stillness. Except, maybe that's not what happened. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra actually let a snake kill her. Some say the bite marks were never found. Others think she drank poison hidden in a hairpin or dissolved into wine. There's even a theory that Augustus, the soon-to-be Roman emperor, had her assassinated and staged the scene. Dramatic, no. But let's assume for a moment the snake story is true. Because honestly, that's way cooler. You're watching one of the sharpest political minds in ancient history choose her ending. After Julius Caesar's murder and Mark Antony's tragic fall, oh yeah, we'll get to his death later, Cleopatra knows she'll be paraded through Rome as a trophy. So instead of enduring humiliation, she crafts her own myth. The venom works fast. Numbness spreads. Her breathing slows. Within minutes, the last queen of Egypt lies motionless, her expression unreadable. Beside her, two handmaidens, Iris and Charmian, collapse soon after. Loyalty in its deadliest form. Roman soldiers find the scene later beautiful, serene, and oh so symbolic. Augustus is not amused. He wanted her alive. But Cleopatra knew how to control a narrative, even in death. And let's talk about symbolism, because Egyptians didn't pick cobras randomly. The uraeus, aka the rearing cobra, was a sacred emblem of divine authority. Pharaohs wore it on their crowns. If Cleopatra let one kill her, it wasn't just suicide. It was a poetic mic drop, the goddess queen leaving Earth on her own serpentine terms. Modern forensic historians have questioned whether an ASP could even deliver a fatal bite fast enough. Some argue that snake bites are often painful with hours of convulsions and bleeding not exactly graceful. But Cleopatra's death is described as peaceful, almost theatrical. That's where the fringe theories slither in. One quirky theory. She used a deadly ointment smeared onto a hair comb. Another suggests she had a tiny vial of cyanide sewn into her dress hem. Yet another imagines a hollowed-out fig filled with crushed wolfsbane. Honestly, you have to admire the variety. Still, the snake image survives, probably because it's just so cinematic. You can practically hear Hans Zimmer scoring the moment. And here's where it gets weirder. For centuries after her death, Roman art kept depicting Cleopatra with snakes always in that final moment. Even Shakespeare went full drama with the line, "With thy sharp teeth, this knot intrinsicate of life at once untie." Fancy. It's also a rare case in ancient history where a woman's death becomes more famous than her life. And that's saying something, because Cleopatra lived loud. She spoke at least 7 languages, had fleets of ships, negotiated with empires, and ran a kingdom surrounded by sharks in togas. But it's the ending you remember. The snake, the silence, the smirk, imagined or real. Of course, there's always the chance none of it happened that way. Ancient sources are contradictory, and Roman historians had a flair for exaggeration, especially when describing their enemies. Plutarch, Suetonius, Dio Cassius, they weren't exactly unbiased fans of Cleopatra. To them, she was dangerous, seductive, too clever for her own good. And that's the real sting, isn't it? Cleopatra's death was the closing act of an ancient soap opera, the final move in a high-stakes chess game between fading pharaohs and rising emperors. She didn't just die. She exited like a legend. And whether it was poisoned snake dagger or dagger-shaped snake, she gave the world a mystery wrapped in myth coiled in gold-threaded linen. You exhale softly, still picturing the scene flickering torchlight, the faint scent of lotus oil, a golden bracelet twitching once. Then, never again. You blink, and suddenly you're not in sultry Alexandria anymore. The breeze is colder, carrying the smell of sweat-wet earth and something metallic. Blood. You're standing on a battlefield in England, the sky overcast and angry. The year 1066. The place Hastings. You hear them before you see them, clashing swords, war cries in languages you barely recognize, and the terrifying shriek of Norman cavalry charging forward like a wave with no mercy. At the center of this chaotic thunderstorm is King Harold II of England. And no, he doesn't have a royal glow or angelic choir floating behind him. He's exhausted, covered in chainmail, mud-caked boots planted in the trampled grass. He's been up since before dawn defending his kingdom from a guy who claims he has a better resume. That guy, William, Duke of Normandy, soon to be the conqueror. You're probably thinking, cool, but what makes this death epic? Well, it's all about the eyeball. According to one famous tale, thank you, Bayeux Tapestry, Harold dies in the most wince-inducing way imaginable, an arrow to the eye. Yep, just picture it, mid-battle, noise everywhere. Then thwip an arrow slices the sky and buries itself deep into Harold's face. He falls, his men panic. And just like that, England has a vacancy on the throne. It's the kind of death that makes you instinctively reach for your face. Even now, nearly 1,000 years later, it's still grossly specific. But hold your horses, historians still argue whether Harold actually took an arrow to the eye or whether that's a bit of Norman propaganda spiced up for drama. Some claim he was hacked down by Norman knights after falling. Others say he was already wounded and the eye arrow story was symbolic, like saying he was blind to the threat. You know, the medieval equivalent of shade. The Bayeux Tapestry itself is surprisingly vague. It's basically a stitched comic strip, 230 feet long, showing the lead-up to and climax of the Battle of Hastings. In one frame, there's a figure labelled Harold with something sticking out of his eye, slumping over. In the next, he's being struck down by a sword. No director's commentary, unfortunately. Still the legend stuck. Why? Because it's memorable. Arrow to the eye, beat stabbed in the leg every time. And here's the fun fringe tidbit. Some scholars believe the entire tapestry was commissioned by William's half-brother, Bishop Odo, who wanted to glorify the Norman conquest. So that arrow, it might have been more marketing than murder. Harold's death also marked a massive turning point in English history, like full-on season finale cliffhanger. After he fell, Norman forces swept through the disoriented English army like a lawnmower through buttercups. William took the throne, reshaped the monarchy, and kick-started centuries of Anglo-Norman culture mash-ups. It also meant the end of the Anglo-Saxon line. Harold was the last crowned Anglo-Saxon king of England, and his death became the exclamation point on a chapter closed forever. But let's zoom back in on the man himself. Harold wasn't exactly born for this ending. He rose fast-served King Edward the Confessor, and reportedly made a controversial oath to support William's claim to the throne before later taking it for himself. Oops. Whether it was ambition, loyalty, or good old political spaghetti, he ended up caught in a three-way royal rumble that culminated in the Battle of Hastings. And to be fair, Harold fought like a beast. He'd just marched his troops down from the north after crushing a Viking invasion at Stamford Bridge 3 days earlier. So when William landed on England's southern coast, Harold barely got a cat nap before turning around and sprinting south with his army. By the time they reached Hastings, they were sleep-deprived, limping, and probably over their daily recommended cardio limit. Imagine being in armor on foot, hiking 185 miles, only to immediately dive into one of the most decisive battles in your country's history, and then getting an arrow to the face. One scholar joked that Harold's death was the medieval version of being hit by a flying champagne cork, if that cork ruined your entire culture. Too soon. Anyway, the Normans didn't stop to mourn. They buried the English fallen in mass graves, while Harold's body was allegedly buried in secret by monks at Waltham Abbey, if it was ever recovered at all. Some tales suggest he wasn't even identified by his face, but by marks on his body only his lover could recognise. Now that is medieval romance. There's also an eerie calm after his death, almost like the land itself paused. England would never quite look the same again. French became the language of the elite. Castles popped up like mushrooms. And the story of the arrow in the eye became one of the most retold battlefield deaths in European lore. Of course, the arrow is only half the drama. The real tragedy might be that Harold, in trying to save his kingdom, burned out like a shooting star, fast, bright, and gone too soon. A king for only 9 months. A final stand that lasted one bloody day. You stand on the same battlefield now. The mist settles in, the birds have stopped singing, and there's a peculiar silence. You imagine the chaos, the clash of metal, and the sudden sickening sound of a final arrow letting loose. You blink again, and think, if that arrow missed, maybe history would have unfolded completely differently. But it didn't. And somewhere in the stitched threads of a 1,000-year-old tapestry, a man keeps falling, with an arrow piercing the eye of an empire. The night deepens as you shift from muddy battlefields to a cold, dimly lit palace in the heart of St. Petersburg. There's a faint scent of pine wood smoke in the air, the kind that sticks to velvet curtains and whispering servants' robes. It's Russia, 1916, and you're about to witness a death that refuses to happen on time. Grigory Yefimovich, Rasputin mystic healer, holy man charlatan, pick your favorite label, is humming softly in the cellar of the Yusupov Palace. You're standing in the shadows, heart pounding, because what's about to go down isn't just a political murder. It's a whole theatrical production. They've laid out sweet cakes laced with cyanide. Wine too, of course, lots of it. And Rasputin, he's just eating, drinking, talking. He's completely unfazed. The plan was simple poison. The man watch him collapse, bury the body, and problem solved. But Rasputin doesn't collapse. He doesn't even burp. You glance at the conspirators. Prince Felix Yusupov looks like he's seen a ghost, which is ironic because the ghost is still chewing cake. Rasputin even jokes about the wine and hums a church tune. That's when Plan B kicks in. Yusupov disappears upstairs, grabs a revolver, and comes back down shaking. He lifts it, fires once. Rasputin falls. Dead. You hold your breath. Nope. A few minutes later, Rasputin stirs, opens his eyes, stands up, and lunges. He claws at Yusupov, growling, muttering something that sounds half prayer, half curse. The prince screams and bolts back upstairs like he just saw a walking miracle, which he kind of did. More bullets follow. Rasputin is shot again, this time multiple times, once in the back, once near the head. Finally, he collapses for real, or so they think, because when they wrap his body in a carpet and toss him into the Neva River in the freezing early hours of December 30th, the autopsy later reveals something creepy. There's water in his lungs, which means, yes, he was still breathing when he hit the river. Historians still argue whether Rasputin truly survived the poison, or if the cakes were baked incompetently, rendering the cyanide useless. Some even claim the entire poisoning story was embellished later by Yusupov himself to sound more heroic or dramatic. Either way, Rasputin went down swinging and swimming. Now, let's rewind and talk about who this guy really was. Born a peasant in Siberia, Rasputin had zero formal education, but somewhere along the way, he picked up a knack for religious charisma and mysterious healing powers, or at least that's what he claimed. By the early 1900s, he'd charmed his way into the Russian royal family. The Tsarina Alexandra, desperate to help her haemophiliac son Alexei, believed Rasputin's prayers could stop the boy's internal bleeding. And sometimes they did. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe it was Rasputin's ability to calm the panicked mother, inadvertently reducing the boy's stress. But in the royal court, perception is everything. Rasputin became a sort of spiritual bodyguard, whispering advice and allegedly influencing political decisions. And that made people very, very uncomfortable. Russian nobles and politicians hated him. The press mocked him. Rumors flew like winter crows that he was having affairs with noblewomen, manipulating the Tsarina, or even running a cult. Whether he deserved it or not, Rasputin became a scapegoat for everything going wrong in pre-revolution Russia, hence the conspiracy to kill him. But Rasputin's stubborn refusal to die turned a political assassination into legend. People whispered that he was a demon, an angel, or something in between. His death became a metaphor for the crumbling empire, bloody confused, and refusing to go quietly. Here's a fun fringe theory. Some believe British intelligence had a hand in Rasputin's death. Allegedly, he was pushing the Tsar to make peace with Germany, which would have hurt the Allied war effort in World War I. Enter Oswald Rayner, a British agent who was conveniently in St. Petersburg and close friends with Yusupov. Did he pull one of the fatal triggers? No one's ever proven it, but the theory lingers like mist off the never. And as for the cyanide, the idea that Rasputin was immune became part of his mythos. But modern scholars point out that cyanide loses potency when heated. Maybe the pastries were overbaked. Maybe the dosage was too low. Or maybe it just didn't work. In the end, it didn't matter how many bullets, poisons, or icy rivers they threw at him. Rasputin's true power was in the story of his death. He became the unkillable monk, the dark heart of a doomed dynasty, the man who wouldn't stay dead until Russia itself was ready to collapse, and collapse it did. Within 2 years, the Romanovs were executed, the empire fell, and Rasputin buried beneath thick ice, and thicker legends remained frozen in time. You glance down at the place where his body was found. Snow crunches under your boots. The river flows silently now, pretending none of it ever happened. But you know better. You were there when the man wouldn't die. Your breath catches as the icy Neva fades, replaced by a sweltering jungle. The air is thick, wet leaves, gunpowder, and something sharp like anticipation. You're deep in Vietnam, 1967, and the only sound louder than the crickets is the pounding of distant artillery. But tonight the real noise isn't coming from a battlefield. It's rising from a prison. You shift your weight, crouching in a shadow near the perimeter of the Bien Hoa Mental Hospital. And that, oddly enough, is where you meet Nguyen Van Lem, better known as Captain Baylop, or as he's tragically remembered by a single frame of film, the guy who got shot in the head on TV. No, this isn't some hazy war fable. This is the death that changed how millions saw the Vietnam War in a heartbeat. And yes, it was captured in exactly 1 second click by photojournalist Eddie Adams. But the image isn't the beginning. It's the brutal, bewildering climax. Captain Lem is a Viet Cong officer. Earlier that day, South Vietnamese officials claimed he was caught after allegedly murdering the family of a South Vietnamese officer, his wife, his children, even his mother. The city is in chaos. The Tet Offensive is underway, and the Viet Cong have brought the war to the streets of Saigon. Tanks rumble down cracked boulevards, snipers perch on rooftops, and nobody is sure who's who. Then enters General Nguyen Ngoc Loan, the National Police Chief of South Vietnam. He's tall, sharp-jawed, and in no mood for due process. Loan marches Lem into the dusty street, raises his revolver, and fires point blank. You hear the pop before you realize what happened. Lem collapses instantly, one sandal kicked off by the force. His body crumples like dropped laundry. The blood starts immediately, and in that instant, Eddie Adams clicks the shutter. One photo, one moment, and it rockets around the world faster than any bullet. You step back. The street is oddly silent after the shot. No one speaks. Soldiers just glance at each other. Some nod, some look away. That single frame becomes an icon, a symbol, a Rorschach test. For many, it instantly crystallizes everything that felt wrong about the war. The image lands in Life magazine. It wins the Pulitzer. It becomes wallpapered across the anti-war movement. But here's the twist: Eddie Adams. The man behind the lens later regretted taking the photo. He said, "The general killed the Viet Cong. I killed the general with my camera." He believed the image destroyed Nguyen Ngoc Loan's life and reduced a complex moment into a black and white snapshot that couldn't explain itself. Historians still argue whether the execution was a war crime or a brutal necessity. Loan claimed the man had just slaughtered civilians in cold blood. Others argue there was no trial, no proof, just panic and vengeance on an already unsteady tightrope of war. Lem, silent as ever, gave no final words. He simply became the image. Here's a quirky detail most people miss. In the full video of the execution, you can hear kids playing a game just down the street, laughing, right as the gun goes off. War doesn't always pause for horror, it just weaves it into the day's background noise. And what happened to the shooter Lone survived the war. After South Vietnam fell in 1975, he fled to the US, ran a pizza shop in Virginia, and tried to live anonymously. But when someone recognized him, the past came flooding back. Protesters picketed his business. The government considered deporting him. Eddie Adams defended him, arguing that the photograph didn't tell the full story, that Lone had acted in a moment of fury and chaos, and that judging him based solely on 1 second of war was, in his words, too easy. Lone died of cancer in 1998. Quietly, no images, no headlines, just silence. And what about the man in the photo, Lem? The truth of his life remains elusive. The South Vietnamese government never released concrete evidence about the alleged killings. Some say he was an officer, others say he was a pawn. His real story, his love's fears. Favorite childhood dish is gone forever, boiled down to a single frame. It makes you wonder how many lives have been flattened into one unfair snapshot. You pull back now, breathing in the steamy night air. The jungle presses close. Insects buzz like old television static. You think about how wars are often remembered not by maps or treaties, but by images. This one in particular became the most enduring visual of the Vietnam War. Not a president, not a battlefield, just a man, pulling a trigger, in broad daylight. And the even darker truth: for every death captured like that, there are thousands more with no audience, no Pulitzer, no frame. So many stories evaporate before they're ever told, but not this one. You were there, you saw the camera rise, you saw the man fall, and now, like the rest of us, you're stuck with the image. You blink once, twice, and when your eyes open again, the jungles of Vietnam dissolve into the sharp, clean sunlight of Dallas, Texas. The sky is blindingly blue, almost offensively normal. You're standing on the edge of Dealey Plaza, and everyone's eyes are turned toward a sleek, midnight blue convertible, gliding slowly past the Texas School Book Depository. And then it happens. The sound isn't what you expect. It's not a clean movie pop, it's a brutal cracking noise like someone splitting a tree trunk. At first people freeze. There's a twitch in the motorcade, then another shot. Screams. Movement. And you are there just steps away from the most filmed, rewatched, dissected death in modern history, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963. This isn't just a presidential killing, it's the moment America's innocence got yanked out from under it. You already know the ending, but standing here, it still feels impossible. The pink-suited First Lady scrambling across the trunk, the Secret Service agent leaping like he's in a dream he can't outrun, and JFK slumped sideways, the life leaking out of a nation right along with him. The car doesn't even stop. It accelerates tires, screeching as it heads to Parkland Memorial Hospital. But you stay here in the plaza where time has decided to spiral in every direction at once, because now the real chaos begins. Lee Harvey Oswald, a 24-year-old ex-Marine and self-proclaimed Marxist, is arrested just 70 minutes later. He's caught in a theatre, no ticket, no getaway car, no real plan. He insists he's just a patsy. And honestly, you're not sure what to believe. Historians still argue whether Oswald acted alone or as part of a conspiracy so tangled it makes your head spin. Mafia, CIA, Castro, anti-Castro Cubans, Lyndon B. Johnson. Even Marilyn Monroe's ghost gets a fan theory. Every possibility has been fed, watered and inflated for 60 years. There's enough smoke to fill 1,000 cover stories. But the fire, that's harder to find. You follow Oswald, now handcuffed, scowling, trying to look braver than he feels. 2 days after the assassination, as he's being transferred from city jail, another shot rings out. Different place, different weapon. This time, it's Jack Ruby Dallas, nightclub owner, mid-tier mob contact and unlikely executioner. Ruby steps from the crowd, raises a Colt Cobra, and fires one shot into Oswald's gut. And just like that, the only man who might have explained what really happened is dead. This is a double death. A twin tragedy. You're watching a president gunned down in broad daylight, and his accused killer silenced before a trial. America, it turns out, is suddenly very good at losing answers. But let's rewind. Kennedy wasn't supposed to die that day. His campaign team debated skipping Dallas altogether, too hostile, too risky. Yet here he is, grinning under the Texas sun, the top down, hoping to win hearts in a city with a reputation for snarling at federal power. What most people forget, JFK wasn't universally loved at the time. He had powerful enemies within his party among Southern Democrats, even in the intelligence community. His push for civil rights, his mishandling of the Bay of Pigs, his plans to withdraw from Vietnam, it all brewed tension behind the scenes. But it didn't feel like that when he was waving to the crowd, that iconic smile glowing from the back seat of the limousine. It felt like optimism, like Camelot, like maybe America could be something golden. And then it shattered. One bullet severed Kennedy's spinal cord. Another struck his skull. The Zapruder film, endlessly slowed and studied, catches the moment frame by frame. It became the most haunting home movie in history. Here's a fringe detail you may not know. The man who took that film, Abraham Zapruder, almost didn't bring his camera that day. He had to be convinced by co-workers. And when he captured that horrifying footage, he burst into tears, declaring, "I don't want to sell it. I don't even want to see it." Yet see it America did, over and over again. The nation mourned. Millions watched the funeral procession, the riderless horse John John's famous salute. Jacqueline Kennedy, blood-stained and composed, became the symbol of national heartbreak. But conspiracy was baked in from the beginning. The Warren Commission concluded that Oswald acted alone, firing 3 shots from the 6th floor. But doubts surfaced immediately. Witnesses heard shots from the grassy knoll. Others claimed to see movement in the shadows. Documents were sealed, evidence lost, stories contradicted. To this day, more than half of Americans don't buy the lone gunman theory. And who can blame them? The timing, the politics, the mob connections. The CIA documents released decades later that conveniently redact entire sections. It's a hall of mirrors. Even the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the 1970s concluded that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, but they didn't name names. So here you are, standing in a place where truth has been chewed up and recycled so many times, you barely know what's real anymore. But you do know this: the impact of that death changed the course of global history. Lyndon B. Johnson escalated the Vietnam War. The civil rights movement surged forward, but with more tension. The credibility of the US government fractured. And every president since has walked in the shadow of that one moment in Dallas. JFK's epic death isn't just about how he died, it's about what died with him. A sense of stability, a belief that the good guys always win, the illusion that violence happens far away, never on Elm Street, never on your television set. Now take one last look. The motorcade is gone. The crowd has scattered. The sun still shines like it doesn't know what just happened. But you do. You were there. You felt the silence afterward. And you'll carry that echo with you forever. You're standing in the mouth of a tunnel deep beneath the streets of Paris. The lights above flicker yellow, as if unsure they really want to be awake. It's late early, really, and the city is still cloaked in a hushed kind of elegance. Except for the roar of engines loud and wrong against the soft silence of the Seine. A black Mercedes-Benz S280 blurs past you too fast for this narrow stretch of road. You step back instinctively as the tyres screech around the curve. Then comes the crash. It isn't cinematic. There's no explosion, just a crunch of metal, the shatter of glass, and then nothing. You rush forward, weaving through shadows and silence. Inside the wreck, barely visible through the haze, is one of the most famous women on the planet, Diana, Princess of Wales. And just like that, history shifts again. It's August 31st, 1997. You're inside the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, and the fairy tale has just ended in a jagged, grim mess of steel and broken dreams. But rewind for a moment. Diana isn't just another celebrity. She's British royalty, sort of. Former royalty, technically. A divorced princess trying to carve out a life outside Buckingham's marble walls. Beloved around the globe, photographed more than any living person, and hounded by the media like a moon orbiting the madness of fame. Tonight, she's not alone. In the car with her is Dodi Fayed's son of Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. They're leaving the Ritz Hotel chased as usual by a small swarm of paparazzi on scooters, in cars, some practically clinging to the back bumper. The driver, Henry Paul, tries to lose them. He's speeding. Later, it's revealed he was under the influence of alcohol and prescription drugs. You wonder if he thought he could outrun the press, or maybe the royal myth itself. Then the wall, a concrete pillar that doesn't move for anyone, not even princesses. Dodi dies instantly, Henri too. Diana's still alive, barely. You watch as paramedics scramble. She's pulled from the wreck, her heartbeat flickering like a candle in a hurricane. They try CPR in the back of the ambulance. She reaches the hospital with no heartbeat, revived, then lost again. After 2 hours of surgery, the announcement comes, she's gone. Age 36. Across Paris, the Eiffel Tower lights dim in morning, but the world doesn't weep quietly. In the days that follow, millions flood Kensington Palace with flowers, mountains of them. Bouquets pile so high the palace gates vanish behind a wall of petals and grief. Grown men cry, children write notes, candles flicker for days. This isn't just sadness, it's something more desperate, raw, like the world lost a symbol of hope and decency and humanity. And hovering over it all, the paparazzi. 7 photographers are arrested at the scene. Cameras are confiscated. But soon the conversation changes. It's not just about them. It's about us, a culture addicted to spectacle. A society that watched a young woman chased down for clicks and covers. The question hangs heavy, did we all help kill her? Here's a curious detail Diana once said, I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts. Not of protocol, not of crowns and corgis. And in death, she became exactly that. More beloved than ever. A symbol of vulnerability in a world that demanded poise. Still, the whispers begin almost immediately. Historians and conspiracy theorists still argue whether Diana's death was truly an accident. Was the royal family involved? Was MI6 tracking her? Did someone want to prevent a Muslim stepfather to the future King of England? The theories pile up like headlines. Some point to the lack of seatbelts, others to the slow ambulance response. Why did it take nearly 2 hours to reach a hospital just a few miles away? Was it incompetence or something else? Mohammed Al Fayed insisted for years that Diana and Dodi were murdered, that the establishment couldn't handle what their relationship symbolized. But multiple inquests, British and French, determined it was a tragic accident. Henry Paul was drunk. The press was reckless. Diana, as always, was caught in the middle. And yet, doubt lingers, because Diana's story never sat neatly on the royal shelf. She was the misfit in the castle. The one who hugged AIDS patients when no one else would. Who walked through minefields. Who used her spotlight to illuminate dark places. Her death felt less like the end of a life and more like the collapse of an idea that kindness, sincerity, and vulnerability could somehow survive the sharp edges of fame and power. The royal family, they took heat like never before. Queen Elizabeth stayed silent for days, ensconced at Balmoral with the young princes. The public used to Diana's warmth found the palace's coldness jarring. The monarchy, for the first time in ages, wobbled. Eventually, the Queen addressed the nation standing in front of a sea of mourners. "What I say to you now as your Queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart," she offered. The words helped. Some. But the damage was done. And those young boys, William and Harry, you glance at them during the funeral procession, just 12 and 15, walking behind their mother's casket before billions of viewers, stoic, haunted. You wonder if that moment ever truly left them. Years later, they speak out about the pain, about the trauma, about the press and the pressure. Harry especially, he doesn't mince words. He blames the paparazzi, the institution, the silence. You can't blame him. Diana's death wasn't just epic for its spectacle, it was seismic for its cultural aftershocks. It changed how tabloids operated. It reframed the role of the monarchy. It raised eternal questions about privacy, press freedom, and the invisible lines that should never be crossed even for a princess. And the tunnel. It's still there. No memorial. Just a replica of the flame from the Statue of Liberty above it, which accidentally became an unofficial shrine. Tourists leave flowers, messages, stuffed animals. It's quiet there now, but if you press your hand to the cool stone, you might still feel the echo. The echo of a life lived too brightly, a chase that ended too fast, a princess who stopped being fairy tale and became something real. You step out of the tunnel. The city is waking up. A breeze stirs the river. You exhale. You've just watched a tragedy played in headlights and headlines. One woman, one moment, and a world forever changed. You feel a rush of cold wind, a sudden plunge, and your surroundings blur from Parisian tunnels to the jagged cliffs and ghost-grey skies of ancient Britain. There's the crash of waves below, the scent of sea salt and blood in the air, and the metallic sting of betrayal. You're not on solid ground anymore. You're in the last desperate heartbeat of a legend. King Arthur is dying. No, not the Disney version. Not the one with singing owls and sparkly swords. You're with that Arthur the warrior king, the myth tangled so tightly with possible truth that historians still can't decide if he ever even existed. But here now, on the battlefield of Camlan, you're watching a man bleed into legend. The sword. Yes, Excalibur is slick with blood. His mostly. The field around him is chaos. Soldiers cry out. Steel sings against steel. And there across the carnage is Mordred, his own son, or maybe his nephew, depending on which version you like best. Either way, family dinners were probably tense. You stumble forward just in time to see the final blow. Arthur barely standing lunges. Mordred runs him through, but Arthur delivers a fatal strike as well. Both collapse. One to death, the other to a fate stranger than it sounds. Because the thing about King Arthur is he doesn't just die, he leaves. According to some legends, Arthur is ferried across the misty waters to the Isle of Avalon, a place where time slows and wounds heal. A place where he sleeps waiting for Britain's greatest need. One day they say he'll return. You smile at the storybook drama of it all. But you also wonder, what if? Historians still argue whether King Arthur was a real person or a brilliant mashup of warlords, folklore and propaganda. Some say he was a 5th or 6th century military leader who united Britons against Saxon invaders. Others insist he's a medieval invention created to give England its own superhero before Marvel had the budget. But here's what we do know: Arthur's death, whether fact or fiction, is one of the most culturally enduring exits in Western history. It's not just how he dies, but why and what comes next. That promise of return. The notion that a good leader never really leaves. That maybe the right sword and the right stone will bring him back. It's a kind of spiritual insurance policy, and it makes his death epic. Not just for the violence or the battlefield drama, but for the way it refuses to end. Arthur's death is never the final page. It's the ellipsis at the end of the story. Want a fringe detail. In some versions, Arthur doesn't go to Avalon alone. He's accompanied by 3 mysterious queens, possibly Morgan Le Fay among them, on a black barge with no oars. Creepy. Yes, but also poetic. Like even his death had better choreography than yours ever will. As you step over the muddy remnants of the field, you notice how the myth thickens the air. You can't tell if the ground is real or memory. If that sword gleaming in the grass is Excalibur or just a clever replica. And speaking of Excalibur, remember it's not just any sword. It's the other epic object in Arthur's tale besides the round table and Merlin's questionable beard choices. Some versions say it's returned to the Lady of the Lake, flung into the water by a loyal knight, where a hand reaches out from beneath the surface to catch it. You're not sure what's more unsettling, the floating hand, or the idea that people thought this was completely normal behaviour for lakes back then. But the death of Arthur did something strange to Britain. It created a vacuum, a longing, a myth-shaped hole that leaders and writers have been trying to fill for over 1,000 years. Every generation has its Arthur reboot, some noble, some absurd. From medieval romances to gritty BBC dramas, we just can't let him go. And maybe that's the point. Arthur's epic death isn't about finality. It's about possibility. About the idea that there was once a leader, so brave, so true, that we're still waiting for his return, still holding our breath, still watching the lake. Some scholars argue Arthur was political PR for the 12th century monarchy, a fabricated past to legitimise shaky present thrones. Others think his story was passed down orally for centuries before making its way into manuscripts like Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia, which reads like a medieval fever dream with serious Game of Thrones energy. But wherever he came from, Arthur lives on because we need him to. He's a death that refuses to stay buried. The mist creeps in now, curling around your ankles, wrapping you in silence. You think you hear the lapping of oars, or maybe it's the wind. Avalon calls to him softly, eternally. And just like that, he's gone, the once and future king sleeping in legend. You step away from the battlefield where ghosts wear armour, and the ground is soaked with both history and hope. Another epic death etched into the bones of Britain. You don't need to know if Arthur was real, because the feeling he left behind definitely is. You squint against the desert sun, brilliant, merciless, and absolutely not the vibe you were hoping for today. The wind blows dry across your face, and the heat wraps around your shoulders like a heavy wool blanket, fresh from the devil's laundry. Before you, a long wooden stake juts from the parched earth, and dangling from it, gasping in agony, is a man. Not just any man. You're looking at Spartacus, gladiator, rebel symbol of resistance, and the kind of guy who makes dying free look painfully poetic. Around you stretches the Appian Way, a Roman road straight as a ruler, and lined at this very moment with crucified bodies. Hundreds, maybe thousands. The Roman Empire didn't believe in subtle endings. But let's rewind. You hop back a few years to 73 BCE into the clanking, dusty world of Capua, where Spartacus was just another enslaved gladiator training for bloody spectacle. Except, he wasn't like the others. He had a different gleam in his eye. Less I accept my fate, and more I'm going to wreck this entire system with a kitchen knife. Which, fun fact, is almost exactly how it started. He and a small group of fellow gladiators, about 70 of them, broke out using whatever they could find. Some say cleavers and spit roasts. Others sharpened stakes. Either way, it wasn't exactly a 5-star military supply situation, but they made it work. Within months, they'd formed a growing rebel army. Not a gang of looters, an army. Enslaved men and women fleeing Roman cruelty. Farmers, labourers, warriors, survivors. Spartacus led them not just with strength, but strategy. He wasn't just brawny, he was brilliant. You'd think the Romans would have crushed them instantly. Nope. For over 2 years, the mighty Roman Empire scrambled to stop him. and repeatedly, hilariously failed. Spartacus kept winning, moving fast, outthinking generals, and freeing more people with every victory. His numbers. At one point estimated at over 100,000. Imagine being the Roman Senate learning your elite legions just got wrecked by a guy who was supposed to die in an arena for entertainment. Naturally, Rome got very Roman about it. Enter Marcus Licinius, Crassus, wealthy, ambitious, and thoroughly fed up with being embarrassed. He took charge and brought the full weight of Roman fury. Brutal tactics, ruthless discipline, including decimation, where 1 in every 10 of his own soldiers was executed just to scare the others into fighting harder. Nice guy that Crassus. By 71 BCE, Spartacus knew the end was near. He tried to lead his people north toward freedom beyond Rome's grasp. Some say he wanted to cross the Alps, disband, let everyone live their lives. But his army was divided. Some wanted to stay and fight. Others hungered for loot. So they fought. One final time. The Battle of the Salarius River. You're standing in that blood-soaked field now. Picture Spartacus at the front, sword raised, refusing to be a distant commander. He plunges into the fray like a storm. He kills. He bleeds. He roars. And then he disappears. No body was ever conclusively identified. Historians still argue whether Spartacus died that day or vanished into legend. But Crassus didn't care. He claimed victory and ensured no one forgot the price of rebellion. Here comes the epic part. To punish the rebels, Crassus lined the Appian Way with 6,000 crucifixions, one every 30 to 40 feet. It stretched from Capua to Rome, a 120-mile highway of horror. You walk that road now in your mind, body after body in the blazing sun. No names, no markers, just death and defiance nailed into wood. And among them, maybe Spartacus, maybe not. But that's the thing, his death wasn't just about a body. It was a message, a warning to others, a flex by the empire, and ironically a legend forged, because Rome thought they were ending a nuisance. Instead, they immortalized a symbol. Spartacus became shorthand for resistance, for standing tall even when nailed down. Centuries later, slave uprisings across the world invoked his name. Revolutionaries wore it like a badge. Hollywood gave him abs and eyeliner. And yes, we got that unforgettable moment. I'm Spartacus. No, I am Spartacus. It's cheesy now, sure, but imagine being in a crowd willing to die, just so your enemy can't isolate one name from the many. Talk about solidarity. Want a weird tidbit. Some early Christian writers admired Spartacus as a proto-martyr figure. He fought for the downtrodden, endured Roman cruelty, and died without surrender. Not quite Jesus, but definitely in the club of noble sufferers. And modern scholars still torn. Some argue Spartacus had no grand vision, just survival and vengeance. Others say he was the spark of something larger, a would-be liberator with no blueprint, but a deep, unrelenting sense that this was not how life should be. You pause near one of the crosses, not to mourn, but to acknowledge. These weren't just deaths, they were declarations. Painful, final, but unforgettable. In the end, Spartacus may not have toppled Rome, but he cracked its myth of invincibility. He made emperors nervous. He made history shake. And sometimes shaking the world before you leave it is the most epic death of all. There's no sound now but hooves pounding dirt and the sharp whip-crack of wind tearing through silk banners. You're pulled from Roman roads and gladiator graves to the wide, trembling plains of Central Asia. The horizon stretches on forever, raw, unforgiving, and echoing with the drumbeat of approaching doom. You're in the final feral heartbeat of Genghis Khan. You know his name. Everyone does. The guy who painted maps in blood, restructured empires with fire, and probably changed more of world history than anyone you've ever studied. But what you might not know is his death, equally mysterious, equally dramatic, and somehow even more powerful than his life. You hear the gallop first, the thunder of tens of thousands of horses, unified, relentless. The Mongol army doesn't travel so much as consume. Their strategies speed terror and overwhelming force. Their leader, a man born Temujin, later named Genghis Khan, universal ruler. And this isn't some medieval gangster. This is a genius, a myth maker, a destroyer and builder in one. Under his rule, Mongol warriors took more territory in 25 years than the Romans did in 400. They reshaped trade routes, they crushed kingdoms, they enforced military discipline that makes modern boot camps look like yoga retreats. And then in 1227, at the peak of everything, he dies just like that. Or maybe not just like that. Because here's the thing, nobody really knows how. Was it an infection after falling off his horse? That's one theory. Makes him sound almost mortal king of the world, undone by gravity. Or maybe he was wounded in battle fighting the Western Xia dynasty in China, where resistance was tougher than expected. Some accounts say he took an arrow to the knee, or somewhere more vital. Others way weirder. There's a fringe theory that says he was assassinated by a captured princess. That during an intimate moment, use your PG-13 imagination here, she hid a dagger and made sure his final memory was not a romantic one. Historians still argue whether any of it is true. The Mongols themselves were very secretive about it. His death wasn't announced right away. There was no royal funeral parade, no official day of mourning. Instead, his death became a secret, a sacred strategic mystery. Here's the part that really chills your bones according to legend. Everyone involved in burying Genghis Khan was killed, so no one would ever find the grave. Soldiers rode horses back and forth over the burial site to erase all signs. Some say rivers were diverted to flood it, and the location still unknown. Somewhere in Mongolia, most believe. Maybe near the sacred mountain Birken Kulden. But after nearly 800 years, no confirmed tomb has been found. Just guesses, satellite scans, and silence. You stand in that imagined valley now quiet and wind-torn. The greatest conqueror in human history sleeps somewhere beneath your feet, or maybe far, far away. The earth keeps his secret, and here's what makes it epic. Genghis Khan didn't just die, he vanished. He didn't get mummified like a pharaoh. He didn't get a cathedral tomb like European kings. His end was an intentional blank space, a myth wrapped in smoke. But his legacy everywhere. You trace a line from China to Hungary, and you find it roads borders, languages, bloodlines. Modern studies estimate that about 1 in every 200 men alive today is a direct male descendant of Genghis Khan. Think about that. His DNA still marching forward. He reshaped the Silk Road. He imposed religious tolerance, yes really. He established postal systems, promoted merit over nobility, and punished corruption hard. He was brutal, yes, but also strangely ahead of his time. And still no mausoleum, no gilded crown on display. Just the legend of a man who commanded the largest contiguous empire in history and then chose to disappear. Want a strange cultural echo? In Mongolian tradition, it's considered unlucky to speak the name of the dead, especially someone as powerful as Genghis. So even his memory was treated like something sacred and dangerous. That's the kind of epic death that bends reality. A man so feared, so revered, that centuries later we're still whispering, where did he go? And still looking. There's something almost cinematic about it. The final shot of a vast empty steppe, the wind picking up, the hoof prints fading, and a single man wrapped in wolfskin and steel, stepping into legend without a grave. You look to the stars now, because maybe, just maybe he's up there somewhere, watching, waiting, or laughing at how no one's found him yet. You don't need a tomb to leave a mark. Sometimes the greatest deaths are the ones that leave behind not a monument, but a mystery. You're in the dark again though, this time the shadows feel damp. Cold stone underfoot. A stale metallic taste lingers in the air. You blink, and as your eyes adjust, you find yourself beneath London in a low vaulted cellar that smells of wet limestone and danger. This friend is the underbelly of history, and the man standing next to you, tall, grim-faced, clutching a match. Guy Fawkes. Yeah, that Guy Fawkes. The man with the moustache, the gunpowder, the legendary almost. You're about to watch one of the most famous failed explosions in human history unfold. Not with fireworks just yet, but with treason torture, and a death so iconic, it still crackles through every November sky in the UK. Let's rewind a moment. The year is 1605. You're in England, where things are a tense, tangled mess of religion and monarchy. Queen Elizabeth II has died. King James sits on the throne. He's Protestant, a lot of his subjects not. The Catholic population is especially bitter, still banned from practicing their faith, openly heavily taxed, and barred from positions of power. A group of Catholic extremists decides enough is enough. Enter the gunpowder plot, a plan as ambitious as it is suicidal. A dozen conspirators led by Robert Catesby want to kill the king, destroy Parliament, and spark a nationwide uprising that would restore Catholic leadership to the throne. And who do they recruit to actually light the fuse? A soldier, a zealot, a man who's seen war, fluent in explosives and willing to die for the cause, Guy Fawkes. You crouch with him in a shadowed storeroom directly beneath the House of Lords. It's November 5th. Parliament is about to open. Upstairs, the King, the Lords, and all the highest officials in the land will gather in one chamber. It's the perfect target. Around you, 36 barrels of gunpowder lie hidden beneath firewood and coal, enough to obliterate the entire building, and most of central London along with it. You almost feel sorry for the rats, but something's wrong, too quiet, and then footsteps. The plan has been compromised. An anonymous letter historians still debate who wrote it tips off the authorities. They storm the cellar. Fawkes, sword in hand, goes down fighting. He's arrested before he can light the fuse. And just like that, the explosion moves from the physical to the political. You blink again and suddenly you're in the Tower of London. Chains clink. Torches hiss. Fawkes is being tortured. He resists at first, silent and steel-eyed. But after days on the rack, his body dislocated, shredded by pain, he breaks. He signs a confession so wobbly and mangled, it looks like a child scrawled it with a broken hand. But wait, this isn't the end. The real drama comes weeks later on January 31st, 1606. Fawkes is sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered, one of the nastiest ways to go. A medieval combination platter of public horror and national theatre. First you're hanged, but not enough to die, then disemboweled, then beheaded, then cut into quarters. But Guy, he cheats the script. When led to the scaffold, broken and barely able to walk, he musters a final ounce of rebellion. He jumps, hard. His neck snaps in the noose before the executioner can get creative. A quiet, sudden death from a man who once planned the loudest. You might think the story ends here, but oh no. Fawkes' death became the spark for something strange and long-lasting. The English government, freaked out by how close they came to being vaporised, declared November 5th a national holiday, Gunpowder Treason Day. People lit bonfires, rang church bells, and burned effigies of Fawkes. Over the centuries, the effigies got fancier, the fireworks brighter. The name eventually shortened to Guy Fawkes Night or Bonfire Night. Even now, over 400 years later, families in Britain still gather on chilly autumn evenings to light sparklers and say, remember, remember the 5th of November. It's got a nice rhyme to it, doesn't it? Remember the 5th of November gunpowder treason and plot. I see no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Fun fact. Fawkes' first name Guy eventually became slang for a man, then for people in general. Yes, the word guy as in that guy over there. You're welcome. History is weird like that. And then there's the mask. In the 1980s, the comic V for Vendetta gave Guy Fawkes a new look, stylized, ghostly, iconic. That white mask with the curved moustache and arched brows. Anonymous, powerful, slightly amused. It became a symbol of rebellion. Hacktivists, protesters, movements from Occupy Wall Street to Anonymous wore it like armour. Suddenly a 17th century failed bomber was a 21st century anti-establishment icon. Historians still argue whether Fawkes deserves the hero treatment. Some see him as a terrorist, willing to kill hundreds for his beliefs. Others paint him as a freedom fighter, standing against religious oppression. Either way, the truth remains, he died but his story detonated. And like any good explosion, it left a shockwave. You step away from the scaffold now. Smoke curls up from the fire. Somewhere in the distance, a child waves a sparkler. Laughter mixes with the crackle of fireworks. Funny, isn't it? A man tries to erase Parliament and ends up with a national holiday his name in every dictionary and his face on protest signs across the world. He may have failed to light the fuse, But Guy Fawkes found a different way to go out with a bang. Your feet crunch over frost. The wind bites a little sharper now, carrying whispers that feel colder than the air itself. You're no longer in the stone depths of old England. You're surrounded by towering pines and snowdrifts in the middle of nowhere, or more precisely Siberia, and the name echoing in your ears, Rasputin. This isn't just a death. It's a multi-act drama with so many plot twists. It could have been scripted by a particularly melodramatic playwright with a grudge. But tonight, you're not in a theatre. You're standing at the edge of a frozen river where one of history's most bizarre death scenes is about to unfold. And you're going to need a moment to accept that yes, this is all real. Grigory Rasputin, peasant mystic, self-proclaimed holy man, spiritual advisor, and maybe, depending on who you ask, total fraud, or supernatural healer, or political manipulator, or all of the above. His life is already a fever dream, his death pure chaos. It's 1916. Russia is collapsing under the weight of World War I. The Tsar is clueless, his wife Alexandra is desperate, and Rasputin is somehow smack in the centre of everything, whispering advice to the royals and making half the aristocracy foam at the mouth. He's been called the Mad Monk, though technically he wasn't a monk, or mad, just deeply weird, impossibly charismatic, and completely unkillable, at least until now. Because tonight, a group of nobles led by Prince Felix Yusupov decide Rasputin has got to go. But Rasputin, he does not go quietly. You're in the basement of the Moika Palace now. The air smells of wine cake and gun oil. They've invited Rasputin over under the pretense of drinks and dessert. He accepts, probably because historically he never said no to either. And here's where things get delightfully unhinged. They poison the wine with cyanide, enough to kill several men. He drinks it, eats the cakes too, and nothing happens. Cue awkward glances. So they shoot him, once, right in the chest. He collapses. Relief washes over the would-be assassins. A little too soon. Because minutes later, Rasputin gets up, bleeding but furious. He lunges, staggers up the stairs, makes it out into the courtyard, still alive, still trying to escape. Another shot, this time to the back. Then, as the story goes, a final shot to the forehead. Now dead probably, but they're not taking chances. They wrap his body in a curtain, tie it up, and toss it into the freezing Neva River. Here's the wildest detail of all, according to legend, when his body is later pulled from the ice. His hands are raised as if he had tried to claw his way free. Historians still argue whether the poisoning even happened, or if the cyanide somehow became inert when baked. Maybe the dose was off. Maybe he really had some insane tolerance. Others say the poisoning story was exaggerated by Prince Yusupov after the fact to make it sound more dramatic. Mission accomplished, Felix. Also, quirky detail, incoming Yusupov, the lead assassin, would later move to Paris and sue 20th Century Fox in the 1930s for defamation. The studio made a Rasputin movie that made him look too evil. The man who murdered Rasputin wanted his reputation protected. You can't make this stuff up. But let's pause here. Strip away the legend, the political chaos, the mystical paranoia, and what do you have? A death so convoluted, it turns into myth. And that myth of Rasputin as the man who simply wouldn't die has outlived empires. There's a reason he still shows up in pop culture today. Cartoons, metal bands, conspiracy theories. Even a 1978 disco hit called Rasputin by Boney M, where he's dubbed Russia's greatest love machine. Yes, that is a thing. And yes, it slaps. Back to the riverbank. The snow is falling softly now. You stand over where his body once sank. And maybe, just maybe, you think you hear a whisper, something rising up with the mist. Because Rasputin's death wasn't an ending. It was a kind of cursed punctuation mark one that foreshadowed the collapse of the Romanovs, the Russian Revolution, and a century of upheaval. His corpse vanished into ice, but the cracks he left in the system still spreading. You blink, and for a second you imagine him there soaked, staggering, wild-eyed, and indestructible. Some people leave behind legacies. Others leave behind legends that refuse to stay buried. And Rasputin, he left both. You hear waves crashing before you see them. Not the gentle kind that lull you to sleep, but cold, violent surges pounding a jagged shore. Salt stings your lips. Wind whips your hair. You're standing on the edge of the world, or at least it feels that way, looking out at the stormy North Sea. And behind you, a dark, towering lighthouse and the flicker of a ship disappearing into the mist. On that ship, Charles V of Sweden, nicknamed the Warrior King. If Guy Fawkes was a fizzle and Rasputin a myth, Charles V was a bullet. Fast, relentless, and ultimately stopped mid-flight. Tonight, you're stepping into one of history's most cinematic battlefield deaths, a moment that feels straight out of an epic war movie, but ends with a sharp, sudden silence. Let's rewind first. Charles ascended to the throne of Sweden in 1697 at just 15 years old. But don't picture a powdered, velvet-robed prince. No, this teenager had muscles of iron and ego to match, and an appetite for battle that made other monarchs nervous. He dived straight into the Great Northern War, a massive tangled conflict pitting Sweden against Russia, Poland, Denmark, and others. Charles fights on horseback marches with his soldiers through brutal winters, eats simple meals from the same rations. He's not a figurehead, he's a frontliner. And honestly, you have to admire the commitment. He leads daring campaigns, even invades Russia, a bold move, though spoiler alert, not a wise one. The Swedish army suffers a catastrophic defeat at Poltava in 1709. It's Russia's big glow-up moment under Peter the Great, and it forces Charles into exile in the Ottoman Empire for 5 awkward years of diplomatic thumb-twiddling. But he doesn't give up. Eventually, Charles returns to Sweden, reclaims power, and of course, dives straight back into war. Fast forward to 1718. He's now 36, older, wearier, but still wrapped in armour and ambition. He sets his sights on Norway, controlled by Denmark-Norway, hoping for one last victory. You're with him now at the siege of Fredrikstad Fortress near the Norwegian border. It's night time. Rain slicks the ground. Cannons boom in the distance. The air smells like gunpowder and wet stone. Charles, ever the war junkie, insists on inspecting the trenches himself. He doesn't crouch behind a wall or observe from a tent. He walks to the front line, peering through the blackness at enemy defences. And then snap. A single shot. A sharp thwack. No one sees exactly where it comes from. Charles V drops. Clean through the head. 1 bullet. 2 entry wounds. In one temple, out the other. No cries. No final words. Just a king toppling into the trench face first into the mud. Cue absolute confusion. Some say it was a sniper from the fortress. A lucky or terrifyingly precise shot in the dark. Others, they whisper treachery, assassination. A bullet from his own men who'd grown weary of endless war-cold tents and meagre rations. Historians still argue whether Charles V was killed by the enemy or betrayed by his own. The forensic reports, yes, they exhumed him multiple times, are inconclusive. Ballistics wounds angles. It's all muddied by time and patriotic revision. But the mystery only fuels the legend. This wasn't just a royal death. It was the collapse of a myth. Charles the Worthine wasn't beloved like a teddy bear monarch. He was respected, like a storm, powerful, unpredictable, and dangerous. His death didn't just end a siege. It cracked Sweden's imperial dream right down the middle. Sweden would never again be a dominant military power in Europe. The age of Swedish super kings ends here in a muddy trench in Norway, lit only by distant cannon fire and the fading echoes of a last breath. Want a quirky side note? After his death, Charles VI's body was transported back to Sweden in a lead coffin. But not before curious soldiers allegedly cut locks of his hair or even fingers as mementos. Morbid souvenirs were all the rage, apparently. And for the extra drama when he was buried, it was with full military honours, sword by his side, still armoured, still stony-faced. Sweden buried its warrior king like a statue carved from ice. You feel that silence, that hollow ring where ambition used to thunder. That's the sound of a man who refused to stop charging forward. Until he couldn't anymore. He was the bullet and someone somewhere finally fired one back. The sunlight is blinding and the sand is hot beneath your boots, so hot it seems to hum. You squint up at a sky the colour of brass, not a cloud in sight, and ahead of you lies the shimmering horizon of the Egyptian desert. You're not alone. There's a slow, grinding rhythm of wheel shouts, camels' dust, and a body being paraded like a war trophy. This is the death of Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the richest men in Roman history, and absolutely one of the worst at picking battlefields. You may know Crassus from that whole first triumvirate trio, Caesar Pompey, and Crassus Rome's ultimate political power team. Caesar had charm, Pompey had military clout, Crassus had cash, mountains of it. Silver land slaves, you name it, he probably owned half of it. But for all his wealth, Crassus wanted something more intoxicating glory, the kind that comes with conquest and the sweet sound of a crowd screaming your name. He'd crushed Spartacus's slave rebellion years earlier. Brutal, yes, but not glorious. And when Caesar and Pompey racked up shiny victories, Crassus decided he needed a war of his own. Enter the Parthian Empire. You might not be familiar with them, but the Parthians were no pushovers. They were desert cavalry experts, master archers, and rode faster than gossip in a Roman Senate. Crassus, undeterred, marched into Mesopotamia in 53 BCE with a massive army around 40,000 strong. Picture it, legions shimmering under the sun, banners fluttering, and Crassus grinning at the mirage of easy victory. But you're now standing near Carrhae in what's now modern-day Turkey, and it's about to go very, very wrong. The Romans expected a quick fight. The Parthians had other plans. Their leader Serena pulled a masterclass in desert warfare, light cavalry, feigned retreats, and a rain of arrows that just never stopped. Parthian archers used composite bows that could punch through armor and outrun Roman shields. Roman formations collapsed in the open desert. Horses shrieked. Soldiers died of thirst or panicked heat stroke. Even worse, the famed Parthian shot, where riders spun around mid-gallop to fire backwards, rained down death while staying just out of reach. Crassus watched as his son Publius was lured away, surrounded and killed. His head allegedly mounted on a spear and paraded in front of the Roman lines. The sight shattered morale. Trapped, humiliated and desperate, Crassus agreed to parley with Serena, hoping to negotiate a retreat. But what happened next is debated wildly so. Some accounts say there was a miscommunication, or maybe a deliberate trap. Others claim Crassus lashed out during talks. But either way, weapons were drawn, and Crassus was killed on the spot. How he died is grotesquely poetic. One long-standing tale says the Parthians, mocking his obsession with wealth, poured molten gold down his throat, a molten warning to all greedy men who bite off more than they can conquer. Historians still argue whether the gold story is fact embellishment or just ancient trolling. But oh, it stuck. Another fringe tidbit, Crassus's severed head, was allegedly used as a stage prop in a Greek tragedy being performed for a Parthian king. You heard that right. A literal Roman general's head handed over mid-play to be waved around as dramatic flair. Ancient theatre had commitment. Back in Rome, the reaction was stunned silence. Crassus's failure wasn't just a defeat, it was an embarrassment. A reminder that Roman legions weren't invincible and desert empires couldn't be swallowed whole just because someone was rich enough to try. And here's a cheeky aftershock. The death of Crassus shattered the delicate balance between Caesar and Pompey. With their mutual buffer gone, civil war soon exploded between them. So really, Crassus's demise didn't just doom him, it doomed the Roman Republic. You feel the wind pick up across the plain. The ghosts of horses gallop across the dunes, bowstrings snapping in your ears. There's no monument to Crassus here, no bronze statue, just sand silence and the memory of a man who tried to buy immortality and got irony instead. You tighten your cloak as the sun starts to sink. The desert is cooling fast, but the lesson still scorches. Never confuse wealth with wisdom, especially when the archers are watching. The storm isn't wind or rain this time. It's steel, fire, concrete shattering like glass. You duck as the walls around you vibrate with the thunder of artillery. Smoke floods the air, acrid, choking everywhere. It's World War II, and you're in Berlin, April 1945. Deep beneath the ruined city lies a bunker, drab, stifling, and almost surreal in its silence. This is where one of history's darkest chapters draws to a close. And sitting inside that bunker is Adolf Hitler, staring into the void he helped create. Tonight's death isn't glorious, it isn't poetic, but it's epic, if only for the catastrophic shadow it leaves behind. Let's rewind. By the spring of 1945, Nazi Germany is a crumbling skeleton. The Allies are pushing in from the west, the Soviets from the east. Berlin is surrounded. Hitler, once the shouting, messianic dictator commanding millions, is now pale, shaking and paranoid, hunched in the Führer bunker, like a ghost who hasn't realised he's already dead. Above ground, the Red Army inches closer every hour. You hear them now, machine guns rattling tanks, crushing the pavement. Civilians flee through rubble-choked streets. Every radio broadcast is shorter, more frantic. Hitler refuses to leave Berlin. He tells his commanders he'll die in the capital, or not at all. And spoiler, it's not at all. Inside the bunker, things descend into a surreal mix of delusion and domestic theatre. Hitler marries Eva Braun, his longtime companion, in a cramped midnight ceremony. There's champagne, a bite of cake, a handshake from Goebbels. And then, almost immediately, they begin preparing for death. You're now in that final room, walls sweating from the pressure above. Hitler says goodbye to his staff. Tells his personal aides to burn his body. He doesn't want what happened to Mussolini, a mob hanging the corpse upside down, to happen to him. Then he and Eva retreat into a small room. A gunshot. Silence. When the staff open the door, they find Eva collapsed on the couch, cyanide. Hitler is slumped on the armchair beside her. A bullet through the temple. Blood on the wall. A pistol still warm in his hand. The bodies are hurriedly wrapped in blankets, dragged through the bunker's emergency exit to a shallow trench. Gasoline is poured. A match is struck. Flames rise as Soviet shells pound the earth nearby. So ends Hitler. Historians still argue over the exact sequence. Did he shoot first, then bite the cyanide capsule, or vice versa? Did someone else fire the fatal shot? Was the corpse even truly his? The Soviets claimed to recover parts of the body, including a jawbone that was allegedly used to confirm Hitler's identity with dental records. But Stalin kept the information under wraps, breeding rumors for decades. Did he escape to Argentina? Is he living on the moon? Numbered just? No. Forensics later backed the official version Hitler died by suicide in Berlin. But those final hours remain veiled in paranoia and confusion. And while his death was quiet, the world he left behind was anything but. Germany surrendered days later. The war in Europe ended. But the ruins, the trauma, the horrors unearthed in camps like Auschwitz and Dachau, they echoed far beyond the bunker walls. There's a strangely human footnote here, quirky maybe, if it weren't so chilling. Hitler's dog, Blondie, was killed hours earlier by his own hand. Not out of mercy, but as a grotesque test to make sure the cyanide capsules worked. That's the kind of man we're dealing with. Even in his final moments, he didn't seek redemption. He sought erasure, and yet the world remembers. You take one last look at the scorched earth above, now littered with tank husks and broken bricks. And beneath it, that bunker now filled with ash silence and the fading stink of gasoline. The man is gone. The evil, though, well, evil doesn't burn so easily. You're high above the earth now, far from deserts, trenches or bunkers. The stars blink silently around you and the curve of the planet glows blue and green below. For a moment, everything feels peaceful, like you've finally escaped history's worst endings. But hold tight. This ride is far from over. You're aboard Soyuz 11, drifting over 100 miles above Earth's surface. The hum of machinery, the faint crackle of radio chatter, the glow of instrument panels, all of it speaks to the quiet, meticulous danger of spaceflight. And sitting in those small, cramped seats, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Viktor Patsayev, and Vladislav Volkov, the only three people to ever die in space. Not on launch, not during re-entry, in space. Let's go back to 1971. The Soviet Union is racing to outshine the United States after the moon landing. They've launched Salyut-1, the world's first space station. Think of it like a glorified tin can with solar panels, but revolutionary at the time. And Soyuz 11's mission, occupy the station. Stay for weeks, break records. Come home, heroes. And for 23 days they do. The crew conducts science experiments, broadcasts TV segments to Earth, and basically becomes celestial pioneers. At one point, they play a little music over the radio. Patsayev even reads poetry. You could say they're the chillest guys in orbit. But space doesn't care how cool you are. On June 29th, 1971, after a successful undocking from Salyut 1 Soyuz, 11 begins its descent. Everything seems routine. They re-enter Earth's atmosphere flawlessly. The capsule lands on the Kazakh steppe. Recovery teams arrive, pop the hatch, and find all 3 cosmonauts dead, still strapped in. No signs of trauma, no smoke, no fire, just stillness. This wasn't supposed to happen. The core's a tiny pressure valve meant to equalize the cabin after landing accidentally opened during separation. The cabin depressurized. Slowly at first, then catastrophically. The 3 cosmonauts were asphyxiated in less than 2 minutes. Silently. No alarms. No time to react. The real kicker. They weren't wearing pressure suits. At the time, the cramped capsule left no room for them. It was a risky design choice, one the Soviets would later change because of this very incident. Historians still debate if a different seal configuration or an emergency patch kit might have saved them. But up there, even a whisper of air loss is lethal. And space is always whispering. Want a morbidly quirky fact? During the autopsy, doctors found burst blood vessels in the eyes and chests of the crew. The sudden loss of pressure had basically made their blood try to boil, not explode, but bubble like soda shaken too hard. It's horror disguised as science. Yet their deaths were not in vain. Their mission proved humans could live and work in space for weeks. Their sacrifice forced a complete redesign of Soviet safety protocols. And perhaps most poetically, their names are engraved on plaques on the moon carried there by Apollo astronauts as part of a memorial to fallen spacefarers. You look down now through the dark. Below, the Earth spins quietly on, and you can almost see it, a capsule nestled in the dirt, still and unburned. The silence around it is thick, not because of secrecy or shame, but because there's nothing left to say. No grand speeches, no flames, just 3 explorers who died further from home than any human before them. You feel the weight of it now, the crushing, beautiful danger of discovery. And that's where our long, harrowing, strangely inspiring journey ends. But before you drift into sleep, let's ease out gently. You're lying still now. The last echoes of gunfire, thunder and wind are behind you. What remains is just the hush of nighttime, soft, cool and steady, like waves brushing the shore, or leaves rustling in a summer forest. You've traveled through deserts and trenches, palaces and pyramids, bunkers and orbiting space stations. You've stood beside emperors and rebels, scientists and soldiers, kings, queens, and unlucky adventurers who pushed a little too far, a little too fast. Each of them, in some strange way, taught you something. That courage can be foolish. That ambition has a price. That sometimes the most epic endings aren't about fireworks, but about the silent blink of a control panel going dark. And even though the tales were steeped in fire and fear right now, it's quiet. You're safe. There are no swords, no snipers, no secrets waiting to be revealed. Just the soft pull of sleep and the comforting weight of knowing that, unlike so many before you made it to the end, your breath slows, maybe the fan hums softly beside you, maybe the light has faded to just a sliver, and somewhere beyond the window, the stars keep shining silent witnesses to all the rises and falls of history. Let that quiet take you now. Let the last images drift away like mist on a river. You are safe, you are still, you are here. Good night.